follow what you're passionate about. My God, that's a high bar, right? The majority of people that come to me actually have no idea, right? They're quite generalist. They've done a bit of everything. If you throw a problem at them, they'll just get on and do it. But actually ask them to articulate something, they're not passionate. And actually, if they do say they're passionate about something, that normally has an overlap of about 4% with what a market's willing to pay. Because if you actually ask people, what are they passionate about? It'll be things like fly fishing, or it'll be things like, nobody pays you for that, right? People pay you to do stuff that they don't want to do, like plug in my broadband or, unplug my drains or do whatever it is. So a lot of the time when people have no idea what it is that they want to do, actually, they need a chance to experience it for themselves.
Hello, and welcome to Elephants in the Boardroom. I'm Dean Van Leeuwen, and I will be joined later with my co host, Graham Codrington, when we sit down with two brilliant guests Lucy Standing, the founder of Brave Starts and author of Age Against the Machine, and Linda Smith, the CEO of 50 Plus Skills and a leading voice on retirement and later life work. The conversation is about one of the biggest grey elephants, aging in the workplace. People are living longer. Many will need to work longer. The old promise of work, retirement, and pensions are being rewritten. And yet, at the very moment, organizations need experience, judgment, intuition, maturity more than ever. Many hiring systems are filtering out people over 50. That's the elephant in the boardroom. We need older workers, but too often we make it harder for them to stay, contribute, reinvent, and thrive. Now, for anyone new to this podcast, we define grey elephants as visible, high impact, yet largely ignored forces of progress. And there's one event pinging loudly on my grey elephant radar. Maybe you've read recently about Standard Chartered's CEO, Bill Winters, talking about replacing low value human capital with financial capital invested in AI automation. I'll be blunt. I honestly cannot believe a CEO can talk about people like that. Low value human capital? Seriously? The issue is not just flawed wording, it reveals a deeper mindset. If you describe people as low value human capital, don't be surprised when trust collapses with employees and customers. And frankly, if a CEO believes that there is 15 to 20% low value talent inside their organization, then the board should be asking a much tougher question. Why do we have low value talent? Who designed the organization that way? Who hired these people? This is not just an AI story, it's a leadership story. The real elephant here is that too many organizations are still framing AI as a replacement engine rather than an augmentation engine. They are asking, how do we automate people out? How do we cut costs? When the better question is, how do we use AI to make people more superhuman? AI will change work. Some roles will shrink, some tasks will disappear, some jobs will be redesigned. Leaders should be honest about that. But honesty without humanity becomes brutality, and brutality destroys trust, and that destroys organizations. The companies that win with AI will not be the ones that scare people into compliance. They will be the ones that help people cross the bridge from what happens to my job to how do I become more valuable in this new world. And that's why I'm excited about today's interview, because the same logic applies to aging. We keep talking about talent shortages, productivity problems, skills gaps, and workforce resilience. Yet we overlook one of the most experienced, loyal, and capable parts of the labor market, people in midlife and beyond. Now, Lucy and Linda will help us unpack that properly. So let's join the conversation with Graham, Lucy, and Linda to discuss aging, longevity, and the future of work. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Achilles, for supporting Elephants in the Boardroom podcast. Achilles helps organizations build more transparent, resilient, and sustainable supply chains. So if supply chain risk, supplier assurances, or responsible sourcing is on your boardroom agenda, do reach out to the lovely people at achilles.com.
So, Lucy, Linda, thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to chat to you. This is a topic that is absolutely close to my heart, this issue of people getting older. And it's not just because I'm also getting older and have just hit the 55-year mark, Linda, so well within now your scope. I'm sure I'll get an email from you sometime soon to say, come on, join the 50 plus skills group. But we really believe that this is one of the biggest overlooked forces of change in the world at the moment. And it's wonderful to have two experts who've dedicated their lives to understanding it. So maybe, Lucy, I can start with you and just say we know the demographic trend. People are living longer than they expected to. But we also know that countries around the world are just not adjusting their retirement strategies. So what have you seen in the research that you've done? If I can just give you the floor to say, what's the problem and how did we get here?
Okay, so the problem is primarily one of a lack of leadership blueprint. So when we go out and survey people, because we have, so we've talked to a number of companies, specifically 226, and this is across sector and it is across geography. And when we say to them, why aren't you doing anything about age? The answer they give us is number one, there doesn't feel like there's a really clear business case about it. It's not like one of those business priorities where urgency may be expressed through the context. So, for example, COVID or Brexit. You have to do these things by a certain date, a certain time. The demographic change and the shift is one of these stealth movements that happens so slowly, so imperceptibly, that it doesn't ever feel or it doesn't communicate the urgency of other topics. So I think that's issue number one. And then issue number two, when I say the lack of leadership around it, is even though things may be broken. So let's say the recruitment model as we understand it at the moment. I don't think it works. Our community don't think it works. It's very clear to most people you have to spend 2 minutes on LinkedIn to see the number of people that complain about how broken recruitment is for people over 50. And yet, if people look across the landscape and see that that's what everyone else is doing, then again, it's almost socially more acceptable to maintain a status quo than it is to put your head above a parapet and do something that's radically different. So I think you've got the combination of those sorts of factors, and then you've got an absence of clear leadership on other things. So if there was a very clear model, and if it was absolutely indisputable that if companies were to do A and B to address the aging demographic, and it clearly led to outcome C, which is more preferable, then it would be very easy to convince people. There isn't, however, that kind of long term strategic planning. We haven't seen governments turning around saying, we've tested it, we've tried it, and we know of all the different things that you could do. This is the one that categorically works. Here you go, job's done.
Mm. And Lucy, when governments do try to do this, say for example the French government last year, they mess it up. They don't get the right language. They come at it from a bad perspective. Of course, the population then goes crazy. I mean, the French love an excuse for a good riot somewhere, and off they go and they say to the government, "No, no, no, you're not changing my pension age."
Yeah.
And you just think you messed up. We have to do some of these things.
Mm.
We at least have to have the conversation, right? And so, yeah, whether it's from a government perspective or a business maybe just not seeing what's possible, there's mess up all over. But that brings your side of the equation in, Linda. We've known each other for many, many years. It could have easily been 20 years ago that you and I chatted at a coffee shop somewhere, I'm sure it was, where we were just saying, and you were becoming more and more insistent that yes, we can see the government, the national, the corporate, the organizational implications, but there are huge personal implications as well. I think that's what led you into this space. How do you see it, Linda, and what does the work that you do add to this conversation?
So, yeah, thanks, Graham. I remember that conversation. It's more than 20 years ago when I was 50. So, yeah, a long, long time ago. And at the time, having the conversation with you as a futurist, you were putting it on the map. Um, but actually, it's taken almost 20 years for it to become creeping a little bit into the boardroom or into the media. Um, but at the same time, it's still completely not on the agenda when it comes to the C-suite. Um, and even in the HR world, it's not there. My work here, from a South African perspective, is quite different sometimes from somewhere else because the, for many years in our post-apartheid South Africa, the focus has been on the youth bulge and moving the older people through as quickly as possible, and almost in some ways making sure many of them left even before the 60th year through retrenchments. And so that seems to have calmed a little bit, although we are in the AI bubble now, and it's possible that those are going to happen. But it's retirement per se is still a contract that each person has, and there is a line, and it's stuck in cement still in a South African context. And I can name on one hand the number of companies that are thinking about creating some kind of process for their older employees to walk across a bridge that would help them move into an extra season of life. Because between 50 and 75, I love to call it the gift season, we are still healthy, we're younger, we may not be in the workplace, but we can create work from the outside back through mentorship and many other forms of work. And I don't see people here so much as angry. They're fearful. They're fearful of not having enough because the system is not supporting them beyond that line or even in the last few years.
Just in case anybody's listening to the podcast and maybe hasn't yet thought about what's coming for us, we need to understand that most retirement plans, whether they are through a national government and the government's social security funding, or whether it's through pension contributions made by your employer, or whether it's just personal savings, most of those are designed using actuarial tables with probably thinking that we will all live to about 75 or so. And the fact is, we're all going to live, most of us are going to live a lot longer than that. That's the problem, right? I don't know, Lucy and Linda, if you just want to, just in case somebody's listening and they've never thought about the problem, just give us a little bit of stats and insight to the level and nature of the problem.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, I mean, if we think about the fact that it was only really in about the 19th century that retirement even became a thing, there is still plenty of countries across the world now where there is no such thing as retirement, right? In the UK, for example, retirement was introduced in 1948. And retirement age at that time was 65, and life expectancy was 66. So you were expected to live for 1 year. Retirement, when it was introduced in Germany in about 1892, retirement age was 70, and the age of life expectancy was 38. So you were expected to be dead for about
Wow.
42 years before you qualified. Now,
Before you retired.
yeah, because it was supposed to be one of those things that so few people were entitled to, because really
Mm,
we just didn't
mm,
live that long. And if you did, well, great.
mm.
You've contributed for, 40 years, therefore you can get 1 year paid for and supported. To go from that to 25, 30 years supported by a taxpayer, and that's where the problem lies. Because so many people mistakenly believe that when they save for retirement, certainly at least when they're contributing into a state based system, they are not saving for their own retirement. what they are doing is they are funding the older people above them. And that also means that our retirement is funded by people younger than us. Now, again, back in 1940s, 1950s, when pensions were introduced, there were 7 people, 7 adults. This is more across Europe. Don't know about South Africa, but certainly across Europe, the average was 7 adults to 1 pensioner. We are now, by 2050, that ratio shifts to 2 adults. So that tax burden to pay for 1 pensioner for that many more years is completely unsustainable.
Yeah. And so if you're thinking the government will pay for my pension, well, it can only pay for it as long as it's got money. And Linda, that's your experience in South Africa. There's not really much of a state sponsored retirement. And that might be true in many other countries around the world as well. But there it's the individuals haven't saved enough. Right, so they lose quality of life very quickly because they realize they're on a much stricter budget than they expected to be.
And if I can just say that I think, so much change during the baby boomers who are now beyond 60, and the X generation are in their 50s and just tipping over into their 60s. Um, but so much changed from a technological point of view during our lifetime, but so did defined benefits move to defined contributions. And I see in many companies when I go and do a talk about retirement life planning alongside the financial pension person for a company for their people that have 6 months to go before they leave. And for many of them, it's the first time they understand that actually they don't have enough and that that's why they're so fearful. And I then try and come in and say to them, you have to recreate something for yourself beyond that line because as I said, our pensions are stuck. Pension dates are very stuck in South Africa. And so that is the greatest challenge now for South Africa. There's about, of the 6 million that are over 60, about 4 million get our state pension, which is about £100 a month in those terms. But for the majority, there's only 6% who can afford to retire, and the rest are in this missing middle who have no support other than the money they have saved, and it's not enough for a longer life.
So, Lucy, in your book, you talk about, or you argue that the productivity crisis is an ageism crisis, and that that the two of them are connected. What do you believe companies are missing when they filter out people over 50?
Well, they're missing out largely all of the purpose and all of the give back and all the sort of the making a difference and legacy making. Um, you know, we can be ageist. So we can make generalizations about people as they get older. And the reason I'm confident saying that is because it's actually not down to my research at all. There are many, many people who have devoted their lives to looking at how people's values shift and their motivation shifts as they get older. And largely speaking, there are 4 key drivers of any kind of motivation. So just briefly, one of those drivers is the drive to defend. So that accounts for things like jealousy, envy. One is the drive to bond. That accounts for things like love, family, friendships. One is the drive to learn. That's things like curiosity, but it's also the legacy, the giving back, the mentorship. And then the other one is the drive to acquire, which is money, status, ego, climbing a career ladder. And as we go through life, we generally find that people meet their drivers around bonding and around acquisition. And so what that makes space for as we get older is the curiosity driver, that desire to want to learn something new, the desire to want to give back, to shape, to provide a legacy for others. And the reason that that's so crucial is because, if you've got an organization that is full of people who all want to strive to acquire, to leapfrog each other, to get to the more senior ranks, that does, in all honesty, need some balance. It needs some balance with the people who've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, who know how it works, who may not necessarily be driven by that anymore, but want to help other people on their journey to that place as well. I guess it's like anything, having a blend of the two. I'm not really arguing that, older is good and younger is bad. I think people hit different stages in life as we go through family, children, and so on and so forth. And the blend of everything is actually what makes productivity really fly.
So, what do you think is the common sort of hidden assumption that employers make then about people over 50?
I mean, again, this is one of those things I don't have to think. It's one of those things that we know. Lots of research has been done on it. And what we know and what we understand is that people mistakenly believe that as people get older, they are going to be more difficult to manage, that they will be more senior, more overqualified, that they will not be able to adapt to the new technology as quickly. There's also a sense that someone who knows more than I do may make me feel or may expose me as being less impressive because then I've now got someone who's in theory junior to me, but kind of reporting to me who actually knows more than I do. And for many people, actually, that's quite an uncomfortable place to sit. So those are the main reasons why mistakenly people tend to get filtered out of those sorts of recruitment systems. I mean, there's a whole host of other things as well that kind of systematically mean that people get filtered out. But it starts with those main motivation points being we're not really that interested in recruiting people at that stage, and without the motivation, the other things just don't all into line.
And I'm guessing, Linda, that quite a lot of your work, I know, is working with the older generation, not necessarily retired yet, but obviously in that category or retired. How do those people see it from their perspective? Because I'm guessing they do have a quite extraordinary skill set, most of them, and kind of must be very frustrating for them as they kind of see their businesses just not recognizing that skill set or using it well. How do you see it from your coaching perspective, and then through those eyes, sort of what's the individual perspective of that?
So I think often, I suppose, we collectively put everybody into one basket in the same age. But the one thing I have discovered is those that love lifelong learning and have an open growth mindset are the ones that are keen to continue. And they are actually the ones that I engage with mostly. There are a whole bunch that really are tapping their feet under the desk, waiting to move across the line, but they actually are not doing much from a productivity point of view either. So, separating these two. But in the organization that I'm running with these 50 pluses is they have amazing skills. They love to mentor. They would love to be involved in working with younger people within an organization. And I think corporate and business miss a huge opportunity of creating intergenerational circles within the workplace so that we can learn from each other, younger and older. And Chip Conley, in his book Wisdom at Work, talks about using a term, the men turn. So older and younger being both mentors and interns with each other. And that in many ways can solidify a much stronger foundation for an organization, and also in creating a bridge for individuals who are leaving because of retirement age, is creating an alumni of industry specialists with expertise who can come back and mentor. And especially in a country like South Africa, we have so many ways in which these skills can be used.
So, Linda, am I hearing you say that one of the responses, and maybe having identified some of the problem, now we can shift towards maybe some of the thinking that will produce responses? One of the responses, it seems to be one of the easier ones for organizations to realize, is to understand they've got an older generation that has a wonderful set of skills and memory and history. And if you can move and stay curious and learning, you're not stuck in the past. You bring the past as wisdom with you. That we don't have to keep them in their current roles. We don't have to keep their current salaries at that high, maybe that high level of salary after so long. But we shouldn't go from 100% to 0%. There's some ways in which we can keep those people in the business. What advice would you give to companies to think about how to do this, and maybe an example or two of ways you've seen companies do it successfully?
Yeah, so I think that firstly, creating value for the person who is on that road to a new, longer life, in creating a new identity for them through some courses that we offer that then help individuals to start to think about their own unique roadmap going forward, but at the same time for the company to identify within those individuals where they could use those skills, and as I said, bring them back um, from an R&D perspective into the marketing of new products, especially when the customer base is an older person. I've had many arguments with marketing departments about their lack of an older customer in their R&D team. And in fact, at the International Federation of Aging conference earlier this year, they talked about the possibility of a longevity person in the C-suite who's looking across the organization at all of the points at which these individuals who are leaving and those that are in their journey, because as the world grows faster, we keep changing jobs even at 30 and 40 and 50. And so it's a completely different rhythm to what we had in the 20th century. And a longevity specialist can create and find those pointers. And that's both valuable for the person for a reason to get up and being able to move on to maybe a portfolio career of their own.
Exactly. And that's the flip side of what you said earlier, is the baby boomers who have been retiring are also still the, on average, wealthiest generation with the most disposable income. They are still fit and healthy, which means they're also consumers. If you've got a product or a service that is selling to 60 and 70-year-olds, you probably need those people represented in product design, marketing, decision-making, and so on. But Lucy, your book, Age Against the Machine, just to remind people, is it felt in part that you wanted to maybe even go further than that, and to see that including the 50 plus people actually brings good value to the business, that it isn't just about necessarily looking at ways to keep them involved, but ways to still keep them in the core of your business, and maybe there's ways to rejig careers as well that provides more longevity. Do you want to just speak to that part of it?
Yeah. I mean, what we find is that most people, after about between 4 to 8 years, do start to experience boredom. So it's pretty natural that they're going to want to start thinking about, well, what's my next step? What's my next move? When you actually survey and look at people at this, not just this stage in life, literally any stage of life, and say to them, here are 4 different archetypes, because again, the research has been done on this, looking at, if you were to sort of put people into 4 different camps, what are the most common ones they fall into? So one is, I still want to achieve, strive, become more senior. The other one is, actually, I'd quite like to pivot, quite like to do something different, still happy to stay within the organization. One is, maybe I want to recalibrate a little bit. So maybe I want to drop down my responsibility a little. So maybe go part-time, maybe do 3 days a week. And then there's the last group, which are, I want a complete change. I'm ready maybe to retire, or maybe I just want I want to become a teacher. I want to do something completely different. And if you say to people, here are the 4 buckets, which one do you see yourself in most? They will fall into one of those 4. And that's not an aging question. That's just let's move away from the assumption that everyone who joins an organization wants to go up a career ladder. They don't. Many of them, as they get to the point, I mean, my experience, so, we've got more than 1,000 members in Brave Starts, and that's primarily the nonprofit organization that the book is inspired by. I literally have nobody in their 50s come to me and say, gosh, Lucy, I want to work harder in a corporate environment. 68% of our members work full time. Most, they're doctors, lawyers, teachers, you name it. And they come to me saying, I want to learn something new. I want to do something more purposeful. I absolutely still want to work, but just in a slightly different pace, scale, change. And that's a huge window of opportunity, right? I remember way back in the day, well, I used to run graduate recruitment for, it was at the time Chase Manhattan, it's now known as JP Morgan. But if I'd go onto the dealing floor or into corporate finance with my little clipboard, people would know I was about to come in and start saying to them, who wants to volunteer? Who wants to go recruiting in INSEAD, or let's go to Stockholm School of Economics? And people would hide from me. I kid you not. Because there's a real problem with saying to somebody, take an entire day out of your diary. Emails are going to keep piling up. You're not going to be paid for it. There's no recognition for it. And your manager's probably going to give you a bollocking afterwards. So instead, I went to the UK. I went to the UK country, well, EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa. I said, I can't do my job. You've got to get everyone to commit to giving me, let's call them corporate citizenship days. Now, if an organization was to say, right, let's just, instead of having to force these corporate citizenship days onto our population of people who don't really want it, why don't we just make this a possibility and make it available to people? You could argue at a much lower salary. I mean, we've been running a poll at the moment, and this is largely people between the ages of 40, 50, 60, saying to them, would you be prepared to completely start over again on the equivalent of a graduate salary? So we've positioned it at 25,000 to 30,000, and 33% of people have said absolutely yes, they would. So that's an enormous group of people. So when you're talking, I mean, in the UK, I can't speak for every sort of country, but in the UK, we've got 100,000 jobs we cannot fill in the NHS. We've got hundreds of thousands of teacher posts that need to be filled. Now, the problem with all these things is if you're trying to get people to commit full time to these and retraining for 5 years before you earn anything, it's a nightmare. Whereas if you say, look, we'll pay you even a short amount and we'll retrain you, the appetite is 100% there. So whether it's jobs you can't fill, whether it's repurposing roles within an organization, whether it's recruiting people at different stages, whether it's career conversations, there is so much people can do based on evidence that would actually make a huge difference to these organizations.
Mm. So, Lucy,
Mm.
I love the title of your book, Age Against the Machine.
Yeah, it's a
Tell
good
us a little
name.
bit about the name and what it means for you and why you chose it for your book, because I'm intrigued by that. I'm really curious. Talk to us a little bit about the name and how this feeds into what you're seeing.
Okay, so the machine basically is a multifunctional thing. It's our brains. So a large reason that I think people do get held back, the rants that you might see on LinkedIn, oh, things are ageist, and oh, things are terrible, and oh, look at the media, it's saying how awful it is if you're a bit older, you can't get a job. Actually, from my perspective, the biggest barrier for most people is their own brains. It is them thinking all of those things, and that's what holds them back. If they were to say, I am happy to learn something new, I'm happy to swallow my ego, and I'll drop down a few levels, opportunities would be available to them. If they stepped outside of traditional recruitment processes and crafted their own jobs, I've seen people do it. It's 100% possible. It's just you have to flip the narrative. You have to think it's not down to the company to spot my value. It's down to me to articulate my value to somebody else. And when you adopt that mindset, as I say, that's point one of the machine. It's our own brain and what our brains do to hold us back. The other aspect of the machine that again holds us back is just societal norms. Again, it's that sense that a career trajectory has to go up, that it's a little bit uncomfortable to shift, make changes, when in actual fact, we can and we're going to have to. It's norms within organizations that say entry programs need to be targeted at graduates or apprentices. Actually, it could be career changes at any stage. It's societal norms that say these jobs must be 9 to 5 days a week. They don't have to be. I don't know a startup that goes from not having a job to suddenly needing a job 5 days a week, right? You can onboard and ramp people up 1 day, 2 days, 3 days as needs dictate. And then you've also got the machine being huge, great government infrastructure that is just so, like the Titanic, just so grindingly, haltingly slow to change and doesn't adapt. So, you know, people at this stage in life are up against an enormous machine of a lot of different cogs and wheels that in many respects do work against them. But it's incredibly disempowering to say, well, that's it. That's your lot. My experience, my my observation, if you like, of literally thousands of people, well, not thousands, more than 1,000 but hundreds, is that it is possible for people, if they think slightly differently, they can craft, they can create, and they stop focusing on the problems that they have. And when they start focusing on who are the beneficiaries I want to support, what are the problems I care about solving, and why don't I just get stuck into that rather than worrying too much about the title or the salary? Let's just get working on something I'm good at, that I enjoy, where I make a difference. And funnily enough, things do start to fall into line. It's when you just get too stuck into that pattern of, oh, I'm panicking, I've got to apply for more and more jobs. That the illusion of the easy apply is anything but. We're in this race now to the bottom of the AI funnel of my AI beats your AI, and it's doing nothing for anyone.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like, are we facing it, whether it's internal, employees or workers? It sounds to me like perhaps we're facing an aging workforce crisis, or is it a failure of imagination crisis? Which one would you say it is?
I'd say the former is the problem, the latter is the solution. So if we fail to be imaginative, then we're not gonna shift things. But actually I know, I mean, again, all of the research on people as we start to get a bit older, you know, everything gets better and better. Our emotional intelligence improves, our ability to make nuanced judgment improves, our resilience improves in backlash. I mean, show me an organization that says, I want someone who's fragile, please, who can't deal with any kind of challenge. Most organizations want people who are resilient, want people who can actually judge, hold a patient's hand at the right moment. Factors that predict whether or not a patient gets sued, bedside manner. Factors that predict whether or not someone goes back to an employment lawyer, trust. Factors that predict whether or not a consultant gets hired again, relationship that they've built up over the past. All of the things that make a predictable difference as to somebody's performance can be related to age in some way, shape, or form. And that's all backed up when we start to look at measures of intelligence. Traditionally, we've been mistakenly thinking that intelligence is defined by crystallized, sorry, fluid intelligence, how quickly you can do something. But in fact, if you adopt a slightly wider perspective, is it actually what we know? Is it how we handle ourselves in a crisis? Is it knowing whose hand to hold when they're really upset? Is it knowing when to intervene when a client's getting really wound up? All of that sort of stuff is far more strongly predicted by crystallized intelligence, and that continues to improve into around our mid 50s. So it is absolutely the case that age is by far and away an asset, and our audience, our demographic, are able to drive the change that's needed. They just need to see that there's an alternative. They need to be inspired. So, I spend my time and energy thinking about, I can't really influence government so well, and trying to influence an organization if they're not prepared to hear, that's pretty unrewarding. But the audience of people who are most affected by this issue, and indeed any successful social movement in history, has always been led by the people most affected. So that's where I spend my time. And my God, is it rewarding? Because when you see these people carving their paths and leading the way, that more than anything is what will drive the change.
Right, brilliant. So Linda, you've one of the words I've always liked you use uh, in the way that you do is you talk about retirement, but rather spelt with a Y. So retreadment. So rather a Y than an I. So it's about retreadment rather than or retirement. You'll probably explain it better than I am. But in your view, uh, how do people move from the kind of resentment to the reinvention that Lucy's talking about them? What helps them rebuild purpose in their life, I guess?
So, Dean, it's refinement with an F, not retirement.
As a
Um,
refinement now. A refinement. I love
refinement.
that.
Yeah, and that's also 20 years old now, but I remember someone saying refiring is a positive upward spiraling word, whereas retirement is a downward spiraling word. And so for a lot of people that are in their last few years and not feeling happy about being there, they've lost their energy, they're not feeling valued, many call themselves invisible to many, even in the workplace. They're almost just not seen. In the next chapter work that we do, which is building this bridge into the next season, it's helping them to pick up the baton and take up responsibility for this next season of their lives. And that as they go through the process, they create agency for themselves to be in charge of this next season for themselves. The, the greatest piece that I see that many of them battle with is identity. Who am I when I'm no longer hardwired for the 8 to 5 job as a banker or as a finance manager or whatever your role or your title might have been. And for many, the status and the identity are very hard for them to let go of. Finding new purpose and kind of one of the things that helps a lot is when they understand financially how much money they have, if it's not enough, that they then create a second career for themselves, whether it's a portfolio, whether it's going back to study. Often people talk about there is a glimmer, or there all of a sudden there is something that sparks their passion, that takes them into this second career. And Graham, I always thank you for that. You were my glimmer at my crossroads at 50, when I had this triple whammy of my children had left the country. I reflected on a divorce from 10 years prior as I was trying to build my future. And the job I was doing came to an end because the company was sold. And I really felt deep depression. But the minute you find something that you can be passionate about, and I use the ikigai concept a lot with individuals to help them think about, what am I good at? What could I earn? What skills do I have? And what does the world need that maybe I can make a difference? And that then helps people to move towards creating a second career. And every person is unique. Some have enough money, many don't. Some have great health, some don't. There's relationship challenges with this longer life of aging parents and their adult children at 30 still at home. So there are a lot of challenges, and each person has to navigate this road for themselves. And when they carry that baton, it's amazing to watch the excitement that builds for this next season of their lives.
I think, Linda, certainly your life is a good example of this. But I think some people maybe who've spent their whole careers in either a professional environment, lawyer, doctor, engineer, or in corporate, working their way up through the ranks, they kind of think that entrepreneurship, this big word that we might use, is not for them, or they can't do it, or it's passed them by. Maybe we should just take that word away. You haven't even used the word, although you definitely are an entrepreneur. It's this second career or a portfolio mindset, isn't it? So that the shift now is to say you don't have to have one job with one employer earning a salary. You can be, and now suddenly you're promising them lots of things. You can be more flexible, you can have less of a risk because you're spreading it around. What advice would you give then to somebody maybe heading towards their 50s, or maybe somebody who's got a parent heading into the stage and they want to have that conversation with them? What advice personally would you give just about that portfolio mindset that I know you're passionate about?
Yeah, I love that term because it does allow you the options to create a number of things. And just to go back to that word of entrepreneurship, for me, many people are creating entrepreneurship of one, whether it's as a coach or as a mentor or as a consultant. It's just a change of mindset as to how they have to market and brand themselves and create a brand for themselves rather than living under the brand where they worked. And that takes some skills as well that we work on with them. But the encouragement for me is that individuals who are moving towards this, that are stuck, is to find what you're passionate about, what you're skilled at, and be a solution to someone's problem. And you will automatically find a pathway that will open doors for you. And whether it's working with young professional parents who need help with their children, whether it's in the caring of this growing elderly cohort, whether it's something completely different, whether it's in the pet industry, whether it's pet sitting and house sitting internationally, working on boats. I'm not sure I want to be doing that right now, but there are many people who design and create a new, um, it's a career pathway, but it has flexibility and choice. And it's in the choice that you get to say yes or no to the things that you no longer want to do. And that then creates the best portfolio. Some volunteering, some work where you may get paid some money, some leisure time, lots of family time, some travel. And that creates this much longer process of earning. And that also can allow your funding to stretch to help you survive for longer.
And Lucy, if we were to look at that, and feel free to add to what Lynn has just said, but then I want to look at it from the other side of employers. A lot of people who listen to this podcast are leaders in businesses. What would you say to them in terms of thinking about this cohort of people who are out there wanting to be valuable, wanting to contribute? What message could a business leader take away from this conversation?
I'd like to see a lot more business leaders open their doors up to more internships, work experience opportunities, chances for people to roll their sleeves up and actually give something a go. It's actually remarkably easy, right? I mean, we can facilitate this for people. So for example, you need a non-disclosure agreement. You can download something free off the internet, just get something that's template. You need a non-compete agreement. So you're not here to steal ideas, you're just here to learn. And you need some sort of disclaimer that says, I understand, I'm not an employee, I'm not going to get health and safety training, whatever I get involved with is kind of down to me. Because I think the biggest thing that's missing for most people is, people very much want to work at this stage of life. If you ask them what the biggest barrier is, after ageism, which is rated as about 43% of the problem, the biggest one by far and away is having no idea what it is that they want to do next. And actually, if you say to somebody, follow what you're passionate about, my God, that's a high bar, right? The majority of people that come to me actually have no idea, right? They're quite generalist. They've done a bit of everything. If you throw a problem at them, they'll just get on and do it. But actually ask them to articulate something, they're not passionate. And actually, if they do say they're passionate about something, that normally has an overlap of about 4% with what a market's willing to pay. Because if you actually ask people, what are they passionate about? It'll be things like fly fishing, or it'll be things like, nobody pays you for that, right? People pay you to do stuff that they don't want to do, like plug in my broadband or, unplug my drains or do whatever it is. So a lot of the time when people have no idea what it is that they want to do, actually they need a chance to experience it for themselves. If you were to take recruitment and say, even if we look at the best, most successful form of assessment, which might be, work assessment questionnaires, the sorts of things like an assessment center. So I do a bit of a role play, I do a bit of as much as I can to get a sense of how someone's going to perform in this job. At best, you're going to account for about 36% of the variance. The vast majority of what we're missing in any kind of recruitment process is self-selection, right? Yes, recruitment has the power, maybe, to say who they want to recruit, but it's always the individual that has the power to engage. And we don't really encourage that in many recruitment processes that I observe. When, however, you say to somebody, hey, you know what, you think you want to do this, why don't you shadow it first? So there was a study taken of nursing, for example. They were fed up with so many people signing on to nursing and then dropping out. So they said for the next cohort, right, this is it. You're going to have to shadow it first before you actually commit to this nursing program. And when they did that, the amount of people that successfully completed was 68%. 68% higher than it was before. It has huge success, and we see that time and time again because nobody wants to do a job that they are going to be bad at, but they just don't have that opportunity. So I am moving away with our community. We move away from, I don't want you to look at a job description. Don't forget jobs boards. I will bring people in who are running small to medium businesses, and I will just get them to talk to our members. I'll get them to say, what does the jobs look like? What are the sorts of skills? What do they value? People get to ask questions. Whatever one person has is usually what 5 other people want to have questioned. And once you start to open up a dialogue around what's possible, quite often people think, I didn't think about that before. But now that it's a possibility, I'm going to engage with it. Because the reality is, for us to really understand what we like about anything, we actually have to try it first. So anything that sort of encourages this, spend a lot of time inside your head thinking about your values. I mean, I know we all have to start somewhere, but that's actually not the right way around. The right way around is test first, find yourself the experiences that you can reflect on after. Oh, I actually quite enjoyed that. I'm quite surprised. Think of it like dating. You know, we never marry someone without dating them first. You would never marry someone based on their, Tinder profile or dating profile. You have to experience to understand if it's going to be right for you. And every marker of anyone who's engaged, I like my team around me, I enjoy the impact I have, none of that is going to be picked up through a job description or most of our typical recruitment processes. So, yeah, I'd like to see a lot more organizations be more creative around job shadowing, mentorship, work experience programs, all those sorts of things. Open your doors, let people talk about their jobs, and you will drastically see the number of people applying go down. But that's exactly the right outcome.
So I love that, Lucy. I thought you had some really great points there. So Linda and Lucy, a question to you both, and I'm interested in both your insights here. If a CEO is or HR director is listening to this episode, what should they do tomorrow?
I would say number one, spend no money. So I don't think organizations need to spend anything at all. I think number one, survey your own employees internally, ask them what's help support they want. If you want to have more career conversations with people, we've got a free download on our website with the kind of career conversations with people at any stage in their life, that thing where you can put people in the 4 different buckets. Um, I would say if you're going to have the bravery to try things out, because that leadership blueprint isn't built. If you want to look for lots of examples of organizations doing really interesting, innovative things, you'll find a couple. You won't find many at all. And even if you find them, a lot of the actual detail, how much money did it save? You're not going to find that detail. So it takes a position of leadership. Now, in order to understand if anything that you're going to do is going to have an impact, please, for goodness sake, test it, try it out, and understand it might fail. But at least you're testing and trying it out. If you're transparent, our feedback group of people in the organization said we should do this or we should do that. Test it, try it, evaluate it, work with some academics. We just ran a big conference last week where we said we had an academic on every single table because I said before you work with a consultant where the data sits behind a closed wall, work with an academic. Give some support to a master's student. Get some free supervision from a professor. Know that you're designing an experiment that's actually going to be something you can evaluate over the longer period of time. Get it peer reviewed. Let's partner up with some of these amazing academic institutions. Get it in a journal so someone in Indonesia or Japan or Peru can benefit from it in 20 years' time. So just have some leadership. Give it a go. Evaluate it. Test it. Try it. But know that nothing's going to change unless you're brave enough to step up to the plate and start to take that leadership example.
Right. And from my perspective, I think for many in the C-suite, there's still a view of a linear work life from education to work to retirement, and kind of recreating a new culture, and creating circles of intergenerational communication, and then doing an audit of what is actually happening within the organization, especially those that are within the 7 years before they leave, to be able to critically look at who may be the people we want to continue with in a different way, and to have those conversations. And as Lucy has says, to experiment and to create curiosity across the whole work line, and to start to look at how longevity is changing the conversation from every part of an organization, and then creating that into the plans going forward.
Thank you. And for those who are listening, we'll make sure that there are links to the resources that both Lucy and Linda have shared in the show notes. Just have a look for those and make contact with Lucy or Linda. or both, to assist your organization or you personally. Just as we finish that, I could keep this conversation going for hours. This is fascinating for me. But maybe Linda first, and then Lucy. Is there just anything that we haven't touched on, anything that would sort of just be a way that we could bring the conversation to a close and wrap up here? Linda, over to you.
No, I think that from my perspective, longevity is on the agenda. And so we've chatted about many, many areas, both from the individual as well as the corporation. I think it's just putting those conversations into reality. At the moment, they sometimes sit in notes, and the younger and the older generations are not communicating in the right way. And if we just open those channels, we make a completely different environment, both for the individuals as well as for the organization as a whole.
I think for me, it would just be, to close out with saying, don't rush in and go and do any unconscious bias training. Stop using CVs as your first port of call, as your method of assessment. They don't work, don't predict future job performance. And, this is just, it's a really exciting landscape. So often a pathway is clear, it is pretty, we know what needs to happen. This is a playground where people get to be a bit experimental. You can be forgiven for not knowing how to run things because there aren't that many organizations who are really nailing this properly. So the chance to actually do something really clever, to do something really creative, to be different, to take a lead. I think this is such an exciting time for anyone who's in a senior position, particularly in HR, but more importantly in a board. That chance to lead is wide open. So just take it.
Love that message. Thank you. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Lucy. It's been wonderful having you join us on the podcast, and I really, really do hope that people are listening carefully and take your advice, because this is an elephant that's not just sitting in the corner. This elephant is running around the room, trampling on things, and we need to take it seriously. Thank you so much.
Thank you.